Discussion of the areas in which we have corrected abuses. Article 27 about monastic vows. To understand what we teach about the vows taken by monks, a person must remember what the condition of the monasteries was and how many things were done every day in them that were contrary to church law. In Saint Augustine's time, in Saint Augustine's time, monks lived together in free associations. Afterward, discipline became corrupted, and vows were added everywhere in order to restore discipline, just as in a carefully planned prison. Gradually, many other observances were added besides these vows, contrary to church law. This became chains that were laid upon many people while they were still younger than lawful age for taking such vows. Many people also entered this kind of life through ignorance. They were unable to judge their own strength, even even though they were old enough to make their own decisions. But once they were trapped by these vows, they were forced to remain monks. If he thought some of them could have been freed according to church law. This was even more the case in convents of women than of men, although more consideration should have been shown to the weaker sex. This strict attitude displeased many good people in time past. They saw that young men and women were being put into convents so that the monasteries would provide them a place to live. They also saw that unfortunate results came of this, what scandals were created, and what traps were thrown on men's consciences. These people were upset that the authority of church law in such an important matter was totally ignored and despised. Then, as is well known, even tougher demands were added to these evils. This displeased the more thoughtful monks. It was thought that vows were equal to baptism. By living this kind of life, they could earn forgiveness of sins and be justified in God's eyes. They also said that the monastic life not only earned righteousness before God, but even greater things, because it is not only obeyed God's commandments, but also the so-called gospel admonitions. In this way, they made people believe that living the life of a monk was far better than baptism. They thought that the monastic life earned more merit before God than serving as a government official, serving as pastor, or simply living one's life as God commanded without doing any of the works established by human beings. None of these facts can be denied, for they can be seen in their own books. Besides, a person who has been trapped in this way and has entered a monastery learns very little about Christ. What then took place in the monasteries? In the old days, they served as, as schools of theology and other types of learning that were useful to the church. In this way, the church got its pastors and bishops. Now it's a different situation. We do not need to tell you what everyone knows. Monks used to gather to, used to gather together to learn. Now they pretend that they, they pretend that it is a type of life established to earn grace and righteousness. They preach that it is a perfect way of life, and they put it far above all other kinds of life established by God. We have repeated these things without exaggerating them so that what we teach about this matter could be better understood. First, as far as marriage is concerned, we teach that it is lawful for any person who is unable to live a single life to marry for force cannot do away with God's laws and commandments. The command of God is, since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 2. God not only commanded this, but also created and instructed people his way. Yet, although there are exceptions to the rule, there are people whom God has created to live singly. Yet, according to Genesis chapter 2 verse 18, it is not good for the man to be alone. Therefore, the people the therefore the people who obey these commandments and law of God are not sinning when they get married. How can anyone object to this? People can press the duties of a vow as much as they want, yet they cannot change on the fact that such vows do away with the commandments of God. Even church, even church law teaches that vows are not binding when when someone who has authority, such as a bishop or pope, that releases that person from his vow. In the same way, God's commands must overrule must overrule vows that are contrary to his word. Now, if the duty involved in vows cannot be changed for any reason whatsoever, then the Roman popes could never have given anyone exemption for them. For it is not lawful for a human being to cancel a divine law, but the Roman popes have wisely decided that they should at times be lenient with these obligations. As a result, we read that they have often excused people for keeping their vows. There is the well-known case of the King of Aragon, who was called back after entering a monastery. There are other examples from our own time. For if, if exemptions have been granted to deal with earthly problems, it's much more proper that they be granted in order to overcome the distress of people's souls. Second, why do our opponents exaggerate the duty or effect of a foe? They don't say a word about the data of the vote itself. They don't say that someone should only make a vote if it is impossible to keep it. They don't say that votes should only be made by a person freely of his own will and after much thought. But it is known that most people do not have the power to live continually holy life. Only a few have taken their vows freely, and after much thought, young men and women are persuaded and sometimes even forced to take these vows before they are mature enough to make their own decisions. For this reason, it is not fair to insist really that they keep these vows. Everyone agrees that it is not a proper vow unless it has been taken freely and after much thought. Most church laws cancel any vows made before the age of 15. Before that age, it does not seem that people have enough judgment to make decisions that will affect the rest of their lives. Another church law, recognizing human weakness even more, at a few more years. It forbids making a vow before the age of 18. But which of these two which of these two the church laws shall we follow? Most monks have an excuse for leaving the monasteries because most of them took their vows before they reached either of these ages. Finally, even though the church condemns the violation of a vow, yet it still does not follow that these people's marriage should be ended. For Augustine denies that they should be ended, and his authority cannot be treated lightly, even though even though other people late thought differently. But although it seems that God's command about marriage rescues very many people from divorce, yet our teachers have brought forward another argument, also about force, to show that force are to be set aside. Every way of serving God is weak which, without God's command, is chosen and set up by men in order to earn justification and grace. For Christ says, "They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but their teaching are but their teaching are but rule taught by men." Matthew chapter 15, verse 9. And Paul teaches in many places that we must not try to become righteous by obeying the law or by acts of worship invented by men. Righteousness comes by faith to those who believe that they are received into grace by God for Christ's sake. But it is clear that monks have taught that human works can earn forgiveness of sins and merit God's grace and justification. Thus, does this do anything other than take away from the glory of Christ and hide and deny the righteousness of faith? This means that the force that are normally taken have been weak deeds and therefore are useless. A weak foe taken against the command of God should not be kept. As church law says, no foe should tie people to weakness. Paul says, you who are trying to be justified by law have been alienated from Christ. You have fallen away from grace. Galatians chapter 5 verse 4. Therefore, those who want to be justified by their faults lose Christ and fall from grace. Those who say that force can produce justification are giving to to their own works the power that properly belongs to Christ's glory. Nor can it be denied indeed that the monks have taught that they were justified in unforgiveness of sins by their force and observance. Yes, they invented still greater foolishness by saying that they could share their good works and with others. If anyone wanted to, he could gather even more examples of these evil things, of which the monks are not ashamed. They also convinced people that, although men had invented the monastic life, it was a way that men could live a perfect Christian life. Is this no? It is not just. Is this not just another way of trying to earn justification by good works? In the church, It is not a small sin to urge people to do some deed thought up by men without the command of God, and then to teach that such works justify people before God. The righteousness becomes by faith is the most important teaching in the church. It is clouded when these wonderful angel-like forms of worship, with the display of poverty, humility, and celibacy, are held up as examples before the people's eyes. Furthermore, people cannot clearly understand the commands of God and the true way to serve God when they are told that only monks are in a state of perfection. For Christian perfection means to fear God from the heart, and yet to have great faith and to trust that we have a God who has sent, who has been reconciled, who has been reconciled because of what Christ has done. Christian perfection means to ask and to certainly expect God's aid in all that we do to carry out our roles in life. And it means at the same time to always outwardly be doing good works and carrying out our calling. True perfection and the true service of God is found in just these things. It is not found in remaining unmarried, in begging, or in wearing great clothes. But the people come up with many evil ideas because of the false praises given to monastic life. They hear celibacy pays more than it should be. Therefore, live their own married life with guilty consciences. They, they hear they hear that only those who own nothing are perfect. Therefore, they keep their own possessions and carry on their own business with guilty consciences. At the same time, they are taught that it is good scriptural advice not to seek revenge. As a result, some people are not afraid to take revenge in their private lives. for they have been told that this is only advice and not a command. Others decide that a Christian cannot properly hold a government office or position. This has written accounts of men who gave up their marriages and their government offices in order to hide themselves in monasteries. They call this escaping from the world and seeking a lifestyle that would be more pleasing to God. But they did not understand that God should be served by obeying the commands which he himself has given us and not by obeying commands invented by men. A good and perfect kind of life is that which has been commanded by God. It is necessary for us to warn people of these things. In previous, Gerson wrote against this error of the monks about perfection. He said that in his day it was a new teaching that those living a monastic life are living in a state of perfection. So many weak ideas are wrapped up in this pose that they justify that they are a life of Christian perfection, that they are fulfilling the counsels of and commandments, that they have works of supererogation. All of these false and empty ideas make us useless and non-binding.